one. And that's the way we ended up in England. And when we got to England, there was somebody to meet us, and they said, we got transportation for you to the railway station, and you've got to check in to the American offices in London. And so I got aboard, had all my men on board, and we went on the train. And when we finally got off of the train, they had big trucks. It was in the winter time, and they had canvas tops over the back of the truck, and the men sat on each side, and their duffel bags, which had their life possessions, were in bags and on the floor in between the two. And it was freezing cold, snowing. And when I got to London, and I went in and reported to this colonel, and he'd never heard of anything like a sergeant being in charge of all these people. And I showed him my orders, and he said, well, this is something new to me. And I said, well, sir, where are we going to be billeted? I said, my men are all hungry, they're filthy, and I said, they smell so bad, I don't know where we could take them. And he said, well, I don't know what to do, son. And I said, well, why don't you call the British? Because I had really thought about, before I enlisted, that I might want to go to Canada, because they were training people, and that became that Eagle Squadron, as you all know, and they were mostly Americans, and they fought long before we got in the war. And so I said, try the British, sir, if you can't find a place for us to move into. And he said, well, I don't know where to put you, because our forces haven't arrived in England. There are no American airplanes here or anything. There's been a mix-up in the Pentagon for them to even send you over here when we don't have airplanes or any place to take care of you. And I said, well, why don't you call the British? Because I had known about the Eagle Squadron, and this outfit had nothing to do with the Eagle Squadron. But the commander of the base, this Englishman, said, I've got plenty of space for them. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can tell you this. We've got quonset huts. They have a stove in the middle, and they're metal roof, corrugated roof, and that's good housing for them. And I do have enough space to accommodate your 67 pilots. And so now the trucks took us to this air base, and I checked in with this British colonel, and he was just about as nice as anybody in the world. And he said, I think you'll be comfortable, and we'll be able to feed you and take care of your men. And we got facilities to get them freshened up and cleaned up, and everything was very generous. And I said, he said, I asked him, I said, is there a possibility that we could fly with you? And he said, what's the experience of your men? And I said, 10 hours in a fighter, but they didn't learn anything. They just were told they had to have 10 hours, and they just flew around a pattern so they wouldn't get lost. And that's the only experience they had, except for those that I had trained. And there were 4 of those, and I said, I've taught them formation and how to fire the guns. And he said, those will be the only men we can take on missions with us. And the rest will just have to stay back until the American forces can find a berth for them. And boy, all of a sudden, I'm set to go. I've got to share this with you because it was so frightening. I walked out that morning. We briefed it. It was still pitch dark. And, boy, I went over there. This is the first time now I'm going in the battle. And I looked out, and the fog was so dense I could hardly see from here to the front row. And I thought, we've got to take off in that. And you couldn't even see the car lights from somebody else. It was so dense in some parts of England when you get those fogs in there. And I thought, well, God, how can I even, we didn't have any range, the radios didn't have any range, and I thought, if I lose sight of my leader, whomever I'm attached to, I'll be gone forever. I don't know where I am, and I don't know where to go, and we don't have any proof of things. We didn't have the capability of landing with help. And the way we landed when we got back from a mission was, if it was foggy like that, they'd shoot off flares. And even if it was still daylight when you came back from a mission, the fog would brighten up. You couldn't see the flares, but you could see the flash. And so we knew where we were. And we took a heading when we hit the coastline at the White Cliffs of Dover. We were below 25,000 feet on going and coming to get into France, where the Germans were occupied. And my greatest fear was worse than any part of that mission. Staying with this fellow and keeping my eyes glued on him and not letting him get out of my sight. And we'd never flown close formations like that. And then when we got to the coastline, it opened up, and now I had never been down below 25 feet. And we were briefed that if you get above 25 feet, the Germans will blow us out of the sky. They'll see us coming. So you've got to go across the channel below 25 feet. And boy, I thought, good God. And I looked out when we got in the clear, and Spitfires were just all over the place, and they were all just snugged up like this when they came out of the fog. And there we went across the channel, and I'd never flown that close to the water, especially not on formation, but he could have flown into the water. I'd gone right with him because I wasn't going to lose sight of that airplane that was my leader. And he got us to the coastline, and by the time I got there, all I was thinking about, I got to go home and go into that fog. And will I ever find the airfield if I get separated? And so I worried more about that than when we got there and we started strafing. We strafed the railroad and the train and then an airfield. And boy, I went in there with firepower coming at us all, just one reel from the ground. And I wasn't even phased. I was so terrified about flying low and formation that, hell, the Germans didn't bother me a bit. It was the easiest thing I ever did was go through that firepower with the Germans. I didn't get a hit on them.
Back to the 100 Italian airplanes, Bob. Tell us how you pulled that off and got them to surrender to you at Palermo.
Oh, this was a magnificent. Every fighter pilot has dreamed of 100 airplanes in a formation and you getting advance notice. And I was on alert. There were two of us, two Spitfires. We had Mark 9 models. And boy, that was a hell of an airplane. Had no range. They were all built as airplanes for protection of the British Isles. They had no range at all. They didn't have fuel enough to go anywhere hardly. And that's what we were flying on alert was the Mark 9. And boy, it was really good. In a dogfight, it was just really wonderful, but didn't have any range. At any rate, it was an experience that took our breath away at to fly with those people. I lost my
The hundred Italians.
Oh, the 100. And here, this day comes along, and they said 100 aircraft of bombers headed for Palermo. And I'd operated off of Palermo, off this little airfield. And with Spitfires, we could use a very short runway. And, boy, when the people were telling me what to do, where they were coming from, and the angle and the altitude and everything, and I thought, oh, this is your chance of a lifetime. You can, if you use one at a time and you do it right, you can be the greatest hero in the world in shooting down airplanes. And boy, I was just ready to go. And I told my wingman, I said, I'll tell you when to arm. And they kept telling me where they were coming from, and I kept climbing all the time. And I asked, do you have any idea on the altitude? And they said, we only have guesstimates, and we would guess that maybe they're about 15,000 feet or so. But the formation is so massive that we think there's over 100 airplanes that you're going to have to face. And I thought, my God, this is every fighter pilot's dream. And so I kept going up and up and up and up. And they weren't looking above. The fighters were watching the bombers, and I got above everybody before they saw me with my friend. And boy, we were all set. And I said, okay, turn off your alarm on the guns and be ready to start firing, and fire just short bursts at each one. We'll see how many of them we can knock out. He said, Roger. And oh boy, I came in on them, and I thought, which one am I going to take first? And I got a call. Italy has capitulated. Move up and lead these airplanes to Palermo. Oh my God. Boy, can you imagine? The world's greatest hero, I thought. Lost just like that. And I moved up in the lead, and I circled, and I thought I was going to run out of fuel. And they finally, they had plenty of fuel still, the bombers did. And I said, I called the tower, and I said, get a spot for me, because the two of us are going to run out of fuel. Spitfires didn't have much range. And they got us in. But we watched those airplanes, and the field was solid, and they went to Another field and landed. But 100 airplanes, can you imagine that?
So, Bob, yeah. So in your 59th mission, shot down, prisoner of war, 16 months, German prison camp up north. What was your attitude about possible escape from prison camp?
I was motivated by a colonel by the name of Russ Spicer, and I've talked to many of you about this. He was condemned for standing up to the ranking colonel that would get shot down would replace the one before if his date of rank was further back in history than the colonel that was now our commander, because we had whoever the senior colonel was, and we had a lot of different ones because their rank would make the decision. And so when they were captured, if he had the rank that was in the earlier date, he would be responsible for all the messages that were passed along to the other prisoners. And there were multiple compounds, but originally when I got there were only 1,100 people, so there weren't very many compounds. And I hid in compound number 1 because they transferred some of them somewhere else, and it didn't make any difference where he was. But it was again another big experience. Excuse me, I lost my thought.
About escaping,
Oh,
about
yeah.
how committed you were
Oh gosh, yes.
to want to escape.
Yeah, that was my biggest motivation was when I was captured, and I wanted to get out. And Russ Spicer had motivated me, and when I was in the cell next to him so often, and it was a lifetime friendship.
But you were determined to get out of it.
Oh yeah, I never dreamed of anything but that. And I had all this knowledge from Gus Lundquist about the Focke-Wulf 190, and I was motivated to someday find an airfield, and that never dreamed.
But General Eisenhower, though, had sent a message down.
Oh, he said,
and saying, "We're about to be liberated. Don't try to escape."
He did.
So what did you do?
Yeah, he said he had put out an edict we'd be court-martialed. General Eisenhower did, and rightfully so, because his concern was that there was more risk in trying to escape and getting captured when the war's about to end.
So you did it anyway.
I did just the opposite. I listened to this colonel that was in the cell next to me so often. We had planned and thought about it, and I said, to hell with that. I saw the opportunity to, and I was working with the escape committee. They created the disturbance to get everybody's attention. I hit the fence, and there was two other people, and off we went into the woods, and the rest is history.
And the Focke-Wulf 190, and you got off. How much did you think when you were trying to get the plane off the ground? How much did you think about the fact that there were swastikas on this airplane, and you were going to fly it to Allied territory?
I suddenly realized that I was the most stupid and dumbest aviator that ever flew an airplane. No parachute, and I thought, you've let your mind lead you into something that there's no way out. What the hell are you accomplishing? And I thought, I'd already committed myself, and my friend was holding the gun on this guard's head to keep anything from happening. I didn't even taxi out. I just right out of the revetment, full throttle, pull the gear up, and I thought, then that's when all of this hit me that you were talking about. And I thought, good God, some second lieutenant right out of flight training on his first mission is going to get the easiest target anybody ever got. I couldn't fight back, and I wouldn't if I could have. And I decided, my gosh, there's a cloud deck here. It was about 4,000 feet. I thought, I'll go up right underneath the cloud deck, and if anybody starts to attack me friendly, I would go into the clouds, and they couldn't find me. And I'd just stay in the clouds until I thought I was far enough away from wherever our friendly airplanes might be flying. And I never had to do it. But I stayed right there, right below the cloud deck, all the way. And then I had to worry about, without charts or anything, am I going in the right direction? And all I had was a compass to go by. But I knew that if I could get to Holland and saw windmills, it would be safe to land, because when the Germans withdrew from any of their airfields across North Africa, they would mine the runways. And when our folks would come in and see that the airfield was still okay, they'd land, and the mines would go off, and we would lose our people. And we knew not to land on any airfield that was in occupied territory, even though there was nobody shooting at you. And so I saw good places to land along the way, but there was no activity anywhere, and I was scared that the fields might be mine. And so I pressed on and stayed under the clouds. And
where'd you put it down finally?
Well, I knew that the only way I'd know when I was in safe ground was if I saw windmills, because Holland had been conquered, and they hated the Germans as much as we did at the time. And I thought, if I can see windmills, I'll be safe to land. So any airfield I can see it, if I get windmills, I'll be okay. But by that time, the fuel gauge was awful low, and I thought, I can't find an airfield. And I came to the Zuyder Sea, and I didn't even know what the Zuyder Sea was. But boy, that's where I was. And I thought, gosh, it's going to be Holland if I can ever find a windmill. It's going to be up ahead here somewhere. Finally, I saw a windmill, and I thought, I've made it, I'm here. But now, no airfield or anything, and I kept flying, and I thought, well, as long as I can see windmills, I know I'm going to be in friendly territory. And without a thought about the stupidity, it's a German airplane, and they hate the Germans. And I found this field, the windmill's not too far away, and I thought, it looks good enough to land in, and I'll put it down and hope that we got some American forces here somewhere. And so I made a couple of circles, and it looked pretty good to me, and I put it down, and after I got on the ground, good three-point landing, had no trouble with it, and I looked out the side, and I saw what appeared to me to be a ditch, where the weeds just kind of dropped off like this, and I thought, if I get hit a ditch and flip upside down, I'll be trapped in this airplane, and there's no way of getting out. Nobody's around to lift the airplane and get you out of the wreckage. And you just sit there until you died, hanging upside down, because there'd be no way out. The canopy would be against the ground. And I saw that what I thought was a ditch, and I booted for a rudder to ground loop to wipe the gear out before I got to the ditch. And I did, and the airplane skidded along on its belly and came to a stop. And I sat there like this. I got the canopy open, and I further said, you are the dumbest son of a bitch that ever flew an airplane. I mean it. I really felt that way. I did not mention this. I think 2 or 3 years went by, and I was at Reading, Pennsylvania, at the NBAA event, and some youngster came over and he said, Mr. Hoover, there's a gentleman over at the fence that says he's a close personal friend of yours, and he would certainly like to see you. And I said, well, I have a lot of people that say that, but who is he? And maybe I'll see him. And he said, well, he said he escaped with you from Germany. I thought, no kidding. And sure enough, he had read about it in the papers that I was going to be flying. And he came down, and they brought him over, and it was like yesterday.
Wow.
And we hugged one another, and he said, when I heard you were going to be here, I had to make it. And as I mentioned, he never wanted to fly again. And he had the gun, and he had it with him, and he gave it to me, and I've got it now in my possession.
Bob, let me jump forward a little bit in the interest of time. You were part of one of the most significant events in the history of aviation. 1987, the fall, we were together on stage at the Base Theater at Edwards, the Bell XS-1 team. The first time you had been together in 40 years, you, Chuck, Bob Cardenas, Dick Frost, Jack Russell, Swindell was not there, and of course Jack Ridley had already died. But that 40th anniversary, and you were part of that event, took the famous picture of Chuck going through the sound barrier. What is your memory today of how significant that was for you personally?
Well, Chuck called me and told me that he'd talked to the chief of staff who had called him and told him he wanted to see us duplicate. And he did mention both of us. Duplicate that great day. And it was a great day. And he wanted to duplicate it on the 50th anniversary, and that's what it was, the 50th anniversary. And Chuck said, Pard, that was our friendship name for partner. He said, I know you checked out in F-16, but now they're saying we have to have an instructor pilot with us. And Jimmy Doolittle III wants to get an extension to stay on long enough before his retirement, so he can say that he, along with his father and grandfather, had flown with me. And he said he'll be calling, and he did. And I called up the chief of staff and told him that I'd sure be grateful to him if he could make him my instructor pilot and extend his retirement, which he did. And Jimmy was with me, and Chuck and I were just honored. He was in the F-15, I was in the F-16, and poor old Jimmy III, I asked him, I said, do you get airsick easily? And he said, no, I've got a pretty strong stomach. And I said, well, you know, the last time I flew the F-16 by myself, I was having great difficulty with my 16-point rolls because of the sensitivity of this side control. And I said, Chuck wanted to take off 30 minutes early or 40 minutes, whatever it was. And I said, we've got plenty of fuel. Would it bother you if I tried to see if I could get rid of that over-controlling? Oh, go ahead. Well, I don't know how his stomach stood it because I don't know how many point rolls in that time I was waiting for us to be called
to do the
in
event,
yeah, to go across. And he stood up with me, but I did it. And some of the films we got, you can see, boy, it was none of this. And that's all I had before was this. The sensitivity. It was a great day for both Chuck and myself.
Jimmy Doolittle III, by the way, was the commandant of the test pilot school for a while, so he had a huge amount of experience flying these airplanes.
Oh,
You just mentioned Jimmy Doolittle. And as we heard from General Bailey earlier and so on, about him having, referred to you as the greatest stick and rudder man who ever lived. That's what he felt about you. Describe the Jimmy Doolittle that you know. What did you think about Jimmy Doolittle, who flew the...
You mean the senior?
Senior.
Oh, he was...
Yo, man.
He was it was like God. He was on a pedestal. When I first met him after he flew with me, he said to the colonel I was reporting to, may I borrow your office? And that's when the colonel said, yes, sir. And we went into his office, and he sat down at the colonel's desk, and the colonel excused himself and walked out. Jimmy jumped up, put his arms around me, and said he'd never seen anybody fly an airplane like that. And he said, we're going to be friends forever. And he said, his first name when we're together privately, being in the uniform, we'll have to act like I'm the general and you're the lieutenant. But when we're together, from now on, it's Jimmy. Well, hell, it took me a long time with that kind of friendship because I had him on a pedestal. And it was very difficult for me to ever get around to Jimmy, but I finally did. And the last 30 years of his life, every kind of a social function he ever had, he wanted my sweetheart Colleen of all those many years with me, and we would join him. One quick story about Jimmy. His wife got a letter from this woman in New York, and she said, I have been sleeping with your husband, and I want him to know that he had told me that he might someday buy me a fur coat, and I want to make sure he does. And she said, well, I don't know why in the hell you would expect a fur coat. I've been married to him for all these years, and he never bought me a fur coat. She told me that story herself.
Bob, you have been obviously a patriot your entire life. When you saw or thought of the American flag when you were in prison, when you think of the American flag now, what does that mean to you?
This is a very quickie. I was at Oshkosh, and maybe someone in this audience was with me, but I can't remember now who it was, but he said, what are you going to do? He wanted to say to, it was, he became secretary of the airport. No, he was head of the FAA. He's here right here. Forgive me, I'm thinking so fast. Yeah, and he said, I'll walk down to the airplane with you. And I said, well, fine. Well, he'd been with the Thunderbirds, and he said, boy, I'd give anything in the world if I could get in that airplane with you. And we were down there just waiting for my turn to go. And all the airplanes had cars parked next to them because we had tools and things. I had paper towels and 409s. And I'd have my narrator say to the audience, Bob Hoover's looking for some honorary crew members, and gave their ages and so forth, because we didn't want them too young or too old. And they can be honorary members and come down and help him keep his airplanes looking good before each flight, because a Mustang, as all of you know, has single exhaust stacks for each cylinder, and the whole side gets black every time you fly a Mustang. If it's got bright colors underneath, you have to polish them clean again, because they can be wiped off very easy. And so I'd use these young people to do it, and then let them sit in the cockpit, and their families could take pictures of them. And boy, they were all just on cloud nine. And I'd let them taxi with me when I was parking the airplane back over at the hangar or someplace. And he was with me, and he said, I'd give anything to go with you. I said, well, you're head of FAA. You can do anything you want to do. And he said, by golly, you're right. I said, well, get your bottom in its right seat. But do one thing. Alan, are you in here?
Right here, Bob.
Oh, am I telling the story as it went?
You got it right. You said, don't touch anything.
I said, hang on to those handles, and I want to see white knuckles, because if you move, we're going to bust our ass. He didn't. He hung on, and every time I looked over, he was hanging on. But if you'd been in his shoes,